His Excellency Sandiaga Salahuddin Uno, Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy of Indonesia, His Excellency Satvinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN Economic Community, Honorable Yanti Rahman, Chair of ASEAN Business Advisory Council 2021, and other distinguished speakers, Your Excellencies, guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and good day to everyone. My name is Juki. I'm the Executive Director of CHARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy, and it is my pleasure to welcome our speakers and thank you for joining us at today's webinar in collaboration with the ASEAN Business Club, ASEAN Business Advisory Council, and ASEAN Bank Malaysia. The tourism sector in ASEAN contributed 14.3% of the region's GDP and 13.7% of total employment in the region. In 2020, however, international tourist arrivals in ASEAN plunged 81% and suffered the loss of 76% tourism receipts. Now, as the pandemic continues to spike in the region, the road to recovery for the tourism sector looks a bit uncertain. Now, today we are most honored to have distinguished speakers from Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Thailand, and Singapore, representing the policymakers, public sector, aviation, and the hospitality industries to discuss the outlook and pathways to recovery for the tourism industry in ASEAN. And without further ado, may I now invite Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid, our chairman, to open and moderate the session. Tan Sri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joki. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. These are not easy times. Let me, first of all, recognize and thank His Excellency Sandiaga Uno, Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy for Indonesia, for agreeing to deliver the keynote address today at the start of this webinar, Outlook and Pathways to Recovery for ASEAN Tourism. I mean, it has been my privilege to know His Excellency for close to 2 decades now, and many people talk of him as a rising star in Indonesia. I would go beyond that. I think he has quite well risen, but he'll go somewhere yet. I would recognize him as a leading light in Indonesia. He has actually been a businessman, and I first met him. He's been an investor, and as we know, he was former deputy governor of Jakarta and vice president candidate for the Prabowo Subianto sort of campaign for president in 2019. And now he is Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy in Indonesia, the region's largest economy, the most important country in ASEAN, and he is a man to be there to take on the serious challenges that we're facing. I would also like to recognize the presence of Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, His Excellency Mr. Satvinder Singh, who became Deputy Secretary General in March and has made a huge impact already in these few months. Thank you for being here. Of course, I will not forget our other speakers today, the CEO of AirAsia Malaysia, Riyad Asmat, who I don't really know very well, but he's had a good corporate career. I do know his father well, which rather ages me, I'm afraid. I mean, thank you, Asmat Kamaluddin. Thank you for joining us too. And our dear friend, William Heineke, the CEO of Minor International Public Company Limited in Thailand, who has been in Thailand for 60 years now from Germany, and he is a naturalized Thai citizen, and he's very much involved in the tourism industry in various capacities, you can see from the bios that we have given out. So I'm not going to get into the substance. We have time for that, but most of all, we want to hear, of course, His Excellency Sandiaga Uno. But before that, I would like to recognize His Excellency YB Yanti, the chairman of ASEAN Bank 2021. Brunei is the chair of ASEAN, and tourism is one of the priority economic deliverables from Brunei this year, from ASEAN. So I would first of all like Yanti to say a few words of welcome as well and introduction. So Wadi Yanti, thank you for being there all the time with us. Yanti, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Tan Sri. A very good morning and also afternoon to everyone. His Excellency Sandiaga Uno, the Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy of Indonesia, His Excellency Singh, Deputy Secretary General for the ASEAN Economic Community, Tan Sri Majid, Chair of ASEAN Back Malaysia and Chari, William Heineke, the CEO of Minor International Public, Riyad Asmat, CEO of Asia, Your Excellencies, leaders of businesses and beyond, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great honor to be with everyone today for this ASEAN Tourism Webinar 2021, Outlook and Pathways to Recovery. Now, while pandemic may be far away from over, we need to keep moving forward and recover stronger. The intensity of the pandemic impact differs from sector to sector. However, it is undisputable that the tourism sector has been hit the hardest. Now, in a joint report issued by the UN Trade and Development Body and the UN World Tourism Organization, June last month, has estimated that the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on tourism could result in the staggering loss of more than $4 trillion in the global economy for 2020 and 2021. And according to the World Travel and Tourism Council, travel and tourism contributed directly and indirectly to 42 million jobs in Southeast Asia in 2019. And we have witnessed quite a number of enterprises, especially the MSMEs, that depends on tourism, have gone out of business or currently see their fortunes hanging by a thread. So the question on our mind right now is how further south will these two highly impacted sectors of travel and tourism go, given the unfolding surges in transmissions of emerging and more transmissible Delta virus, despite the relentless vaccination procurement and rollouts of ASEAN member states, strict lockdowns and also restrictions on national and cross-border mobility are re-emerging all over the place. Now, be that as it may, it is in today's webinar context that I find a great deal of hope and encouragement to seek the light in finding ways and means despite the challenges, by which private and public sectors should work together hand in hand to formulate a recovery roadmap for the travel and tourism, as it is an undertaking worthy of all our support to protect people's lives and livelihoods and ensure leaving no one behind. Now, in the light of global vaccination rollouts and increased adoption of digital solutions for safe travel, the United Nations stated that this can lead to a rise in international mobility, and the travel and tourism will recover sooner in countries with higher vaccination rates, such as France, Germany, UK, and US. Now, in comparison, presumably, if ASEAN can ramp up its vaccination campaign to attend population protection at 40 to 50%, full vaccination of its population and herd immunity of 70%, the sooner the ease of restrictions of ASEAN then can create travel corridors and bubbles with these countries. Now, the Travel Weekly Asia reported that intra-ASEAN travels contributed more than 40% of travel within the region before the pandemic. If we wish to recover those levels, ASEAN as a region must improve traveler confidence by ensuring end-to-end compliance with healthcare protocols set by the World Health Organization and among other innovative measures. Now, I am very contented to share that under the stewardship of the ASEAN Malaysia Chair, Tan Sri Munir, our healthcare working group has been revived for this purpose to strategize and come up with concrete and complementary measures on healthcare in support of the gradual revival of travel in the region. Furthermore, under the Brunei's chairmanship this year, I am also pleased to share that the groundwork for the recovery of tourism sector is much embedded in the Priority Economic Deliverables this year. We are expecting the endorsement to the leaders of the post-COVID-19 tourism recovery plan, soon consisting of the study of the impact of COVID-19 on the sector and policy and best practices recommendations that can be implemented along the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. Now, the recovery framework is supported by the ASEAN Tourism Minister at the 24th ASEAN Tourism Meeting on the 4th of February 21, where non-pen declaration to rebuild tourism was actually adopted. I remain hopeful and confident that once the ASEAN initiative on travel corridor framework arrangement is finalized, essential businesses travel can be safely resumed. Today, we look forward to hear and learn from our distinguished experts and panelists to dive deeper on how ASEAN's travel and tourism can recover given the current challenges. It is crucial that we have a holistic and deeper understanding during this webinar today so we can come up with practical actions for short and medium-term solutions and recommendations with hope to bring forward to ASEAN so the translation from ideas and concepts to execution can be achieved with the speed and urgent attention it deserves. Now, before I end, I would like to take this opportunity to applaud Chari's initiatives for vigorously putting together a pathway to recovery on travel and tourism. And to end, I wish to reaffirm ASEAN-backed commitment to work closely with our partners, Chari, the Joint Business Councils, industry experts, and all stakeholders, and above all, the ASEAN, with ASEAN to bring back travel and tourism in its pre-pandemic footing as one of the key drivers of economic growth and sustainability for this region. So I look forward to a fruitful and beneficial discussion today, and only by doing this, sama-sama, we can then recover and become stronger together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, YB Yanti, for those introductory remarks. It now actually gives me a very great pleasure to invite His Excellency Santiago Uno, who's agreed to give this keynote address and then to stay on. I hope he can stay on longer than the length of time that we've been told he could. I know his schedule is really tight, but as long as he can, it'd be fantastic, and he's agreed to do so, to stay on. And therefore, His Excellency Santiago Uno, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Terima kasih banyak, Tan Sri Munir Majid. His Excellency Satvinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN Economic Community, my very good friend from a very, very long time ago, Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid, Chairman of CHARI, ASEAN Research and Advocacy, and also President of ASEAN Business Club. The Honorable Yanti Rahman, Chair of ASEAN Business Advisory Council 2021. Thank you for your opening remarks. Mr. Riyad Asmat, President of AirAsia Digital, of AirAsia Group, who has a very stellar career. Also, one of the region's best entrepreneur, Mr. William Heineke, Chief Executive Officers of Miners International Public Company Limited, and a member of ASEAN Business Club. Over the years, I've been meeting Bill on and off of the meetings across ASEAN. And Ms. Juki Hong, Executive Director of CHARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings to you all. A very good day to everybody here. We have 154 participants. Well, I thought about wearing a suit, but it's in the Zoom settings, it won't be that grand of an entrance. So I decided to wear a bomber jacket from Garut. It's a region in west part of Java, a beautiful view and very good leather products. So it's also promoting our creative economy. And it suits well because we're in a war against COVID-19. And we are now basically carpet bombing the entire country with vaccines. I just got back from a vaccine drive whereby we're doing close to 2,000 per day in an effort to reach the target of 5 million vaccines a day set by the President, Pak Jokowi. Hopefully, before the end of the year, will hit the target of 75% of all targeted populations receive the vaccine. Allow me to share some slides very quickly. Some of these numbers and presentations you may be very well aware. And I really like to thank Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid, who kindly invited me for this webinar 2021. And also, I would like to thank him when he invited me to Kuala Lumpur when I just lost an election. So you are truly a friend in need and a friend indeed. Not when I'm in office, but when I was nobody. Thank you very much, Tan Sri. So here I would like to take this opportunity to share about our strategy. I assumed the post 7 months ago. The president instructed me, and this is really a tough time, basically in the middle of pandemic, and people were thinking that 2021 will be the recovery year, not knowing that there are new variants of concerns that we have to face. So the numbers of the tourism and creative economy is actually doesn't look pretty encouraging, but we have 34 million Indonesians having their livelihoods depend on the tourism, 14 million, and creative economy sectors of 20 million. All the numbers pointed southward, as what Ibu Yanti has mentioned, and we see the foreign exchange earnings collapse from 17 billion to roughly about 3 billion and continue to go down this year. And we are trying very hard with interventions in the tourism and creative economy sectors to stop the bleeding in terms of people who are getting furlough, also losing their jobs, or basically having their working hours reduced. The recovery stage of the tourism relies on revitalizing destinations and improving market confidence. We also focus on recovering the demand of domestic tourism because international tourism is not available at this time, but we have close to 200 millions travelers, 200 millions of basically people crisscrossing the archipelago. So that would be our focus. And then we are preparing for the recovery of the international demand sometimes down the road, together with TCA, travel bubble, preparing for the MICE and events. Next year, we will be the president of the G20. So we have close to 200 large international meetings that we are preparing. And in 2023, we're taking chairmanship of ASEAN. So this would be 2 years that we hope, starting next year, that we will recover in terms of international arrivals. And then we keep continuing the tourism development into more quality, not quantity based, and also focusing on sustainability, making it as environmental friendly as possible. The way we achieve this is through 3 main pillars and verticals, I would say, is innovations. We're using big data analytics. We're using basically machine learning. We're using collaborations also, as well as adaptations, because this is in the middle of pandemic. Everything has to follow a very strict, we call it CHSE, Cleanliness, Health, Safety, and Environmental Sustainability. And we are collaborating. I just got back from a meeting with one of the e-commerce giants, and we're using some of their data and some of their footprints in terms of how we prepare to revitalize the sectors. We are delivering grants. This is social interventions to about almost 7,000 hotels and close to 8,000 restaurants. And this year we will continue what we delivered last year. We delivered 3.3 trillion of rupiahs of grant last year. And this is done through the local government. This year, we propose slightly as we shifted to a more holistic approach. So we are also continuing the programs in terms of how these hotels would be able to survive, and the restaurants. I need to learn from Bill how to segue into more digital footprint. So the allocations is slightly decreasing, but in terms of quality of our social interventions will get higher as we do more social assistance through other ministries and agencies. We also improve access to financing, and these are the sectors that we are targeting, all the way from culinary, fashions, craft applications, game development, film, animations and video, and also tourism. The certifications that we run have touched 8,000 venues last year, and we're increasing the certifications this year. We name it CHSE, and we were able to wiggle in the sustainability part of it, which is shown in the next slide, that these venues also have guidance on how they conduct events, all the way from the zoning to bubble, requiring some of the testing as well as tracing, and how events are being carried out in a different part of the country, because what is good for Jakarta and Bali may not be true for Danau Toba or Borobudur. So this is very localized, customized, and also very personalized and smaller in size. We're focusing, as I said earlier, on domestic tourism. The next slide, we are seeing how we have been not that focused in the past of domestic tourism. We're focusing on trying to increase the quantity of international tourist arrivals. But we are now focusing and also pivoting so that we will get how to recover the sectors through the help of domestic tourists. This travel corridor arrangements is the one that has been asked a lot. And Bali is a key, because Bali's economy is hurt. It has basically received negative 12% in the 4 quarters in a row. So we are preparing Bali's bubble, and hopefully once the COVID number goes down below 100 in Bali, we'll be able to initiate with a pilot project with various countries that is already very, very eager to send their tourists to Bali. And then Bintan and Batam also with the partnership with Singapore and Malaysia. The proposed flow for international tourists is still being finalized. It's not yet cast in concrete, but it will cover end-to-end from pre-arrivals, arrivals, during stay, and then departure. As about Bali Reopening and vaccinations program, I'd like to update you that Bali has received close to 80% first dose of vaccine and almost 30% of second dose. So we're on track. Before we take over the presidency of G20 by October this year, we will have close to 80-85% Balinese vaccinated. So with that, I think we are confident to reopen Bali with acknowledgement that we need to improve the health protocol. We need to also enlarge the test, tracing, and treatment, as well as we need to make sure that the health protocol, wearing masks, social distancing, and washing the hands are being adhered to on a very strict basis and disciplined basis. What are the preconditions? The preconditions is pandemic in controlled and conducive situations, and that already set the numbers, and I agreed with the president. It's below 100 and bed occupancy rate under 50% and vaccinations more than 75%. And then it's also one of the preconditions is attested end-to-end certifications from pre-departures to the returning is done, and the industry is ready to receive foreign tourists. So to complete my presentations, I hope that every one of us can enjoy this delightful webinar. I know it's very, very tough time. These two sectors are basically hit very hard. However, within the creative economy, we have 17 subsectors, and one of the subsectors that is actually thriving is e-commerce, also applications, gaming. We are just in the process of book building one of the largest e-commerce local unicorns going public in the midst of pandemic, and they're getting huge interest from overseas and local investors. So it's, I guess, a key of how quickly we adapt and we pivot towards pandemic winner industries. And I think we're very confident that tourism and creative economy will lead the country and produce a much larger contributions to our economy recovering from the pandemic. Thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I return the floor to the moderator.
Salam, Excellency. Thank you very much for that sweep of presentation on what Indonesia is doing, you know, and in a short 7 months since your appointment in December, with moving goalposts, things changing all the time, all the parts are moving all the time. So it's must have been very, very difficult, you know, to adjust and position, you know, targets, but it was very interesting to hear of your plans anyway. You know, and Indonesia is, if I may, the most important country, most important economy, and the largest in ASEAN. And I'd like to focus on the ASEAN side of things, if drag you into the ASEAN side of things, because I think ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework talks about tourism as one of its main recovery points. So that's the priority economic sort of pillars in the Brunei. Now, the main worry people have, you know, about ASEAN is ASEAN does not gel together. And I'd like to focus on tourism in particular, when it needs to gel together. And Indonesia's participation and leadership in pushing this is critical. I mean, Yanti mentioned that 40%, there's only 40% intra-ASEAN tourist movement. You had mentioned, Excellency, domestic tourism as something we must start, you know, now. May I lead you to this situation why don't we also focus on ASEAN, intra-ASEAN tourism? how to develop that, because that's so critical. Most countries in the world are moving away, have moved away from international arrivals, tourism, to domestic. I mean, I'm in the UK, for example, I see numbers here in the UK. Domestic tourism is now 62% of total tourism business, about £9 billion, from 41%. It's a 50% jump. So I think for ASEAN as a whole, just imagine the impact if we can have more than 40% intra-ASEAN. What is holding back? Yanti mentioned, okay, we have a public health working group, that we've set up, trying to identify what are the areas for mutual confidence that can be built among ASEAN countries, and to actually zoom in on them and have standards that are believed. And the problem is, people have there's this problem in ASEAN. They talk about cooperation, but then when it comes to establishing mutually acceptable standards among them, confidence mutually among them, they look elsewhere, and not to ASEAN. So how can Indonesia help focus on the growth in the ASEAN tourism industry, intra-ASEAN? If I may sort of put that to you.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail by its head. And no disrespect about our previous policies. We have been, I guess, competing against each other in terms of international tourist arrival. We look up to Thailand and to a certain extent Malaysia in terms of getting more international arrivals, and we promote like hell. In a way, it's good, but we forgot that actually there are much better ways if we collaborate. Because now, accelerated by COVID, I think we have to look not only in Indonesia domestic potential of 200 million tourists, but it's the 600 million ASEAN populations, which is now should explore within the ASEAN. And I would like to take a step, and because we are preparing for our ASEAN summit soon in October, we need to push this forward. At least tourism can be the change agent of basically revitalizations of policies in terms of how we collaborate, because the data that we're getting from the likes of Airbnb and big like Traveloka is basically people will take one longer trips. Typically now it is more than 2 weeks, not for business travelers, but for the international travelers. It will be a much better offering if we could collaborate to let them have the ASEAN experience. That's number one. Number two, ASEAN is very, very lucky because we're not seasonal. So it's all year long. And we could actually do joint promotions, and we could start pilot project. Maybe few of the destinations within ASEAN can collaborate and have, like in the past we have sister cities. Why don't we have sister tourist destinations? And then we could pair with direct flights. We have Air Asia here, and also we could, I guess, on the digital part, we could collaborate, because Indonesia is by far one of the, if not the largest e-commerce and digital market, digital economy in the region, and one of the fastest growing. So yeah, I'm very optimistic, Tan Sri. I think it's a great and brilliant idea, and we would like to take a lead on this. Anyway, ASEAN Secretariat is like 500 meters from my home. I could run under 5 minutes to ASEAN Secretariat from here, so it's very close. And yeah, I think it's good. And my colleagues here, and I have excellent colleagues all the way, I guess, from different parts of background. Ibu Kurleni Ukar, she is in charge of strategic policy, would really love to take part of this. Pak Wisnu also, who's taking care of human capital and institutional relations, all with their staffs, are very eager if there is an opening on how we could work together much closer. And we could start with the health workers. I agree with Ibu Yanti. Health workers are very tired because they've been, for the past year and a half maybe, have been really at the forefront. Once this pandemic is residing, hopefully, we could give them a package, a tourism package to taste some break and to experience ASEAN tourism.
Oh, wonderful. So I think as one of the outputs, follow up to this webinar, we hope we can follow up with Indonesia, you in particular, to make a concentrated effort to revive tourism intra-ASEAN as the step. In fact, one of the participants actually used the word revenge tourism, revenge tourism as a means whereby, like in Europe, now they have tourism in situ, domestically and regionally, whereas those guys have been coming to, Phuket and Bali and so on and so forth. But our revenge tourism is our people, the rich people in ASEAN, actually have been going to Paris and you name it, New York. But now they cannot travel such distances either, that easily. They wouldn't want to do so. Why don't we make a concentrated effort, for ASEAN? But I would like to move on to your point, particularly about corridors, the travel bubbles that we must establish. What should be in the travel wallet? This is the big question. What mutual trust and how to develop the mutual trust and confidence, in terms of having standards which are accepted and believed in, and what state of national COVID situations should that be? That's a problem. Maybe we cut salami size, salami slice the COVID situations, into sort of regions like you mentioned, and have bubbles between Phuket and Langkawi and Bali, and just, I think we do need Indonesian leadership and support very, very much, But just coming back, how do we build up this mutual trust and confidence in the tests that I mean, in the vaccines even, the vaccination that has taken place, in the tests that have been done, the antibodies test. People want to know whether you've done the antibodies test and to believe it is not a 6:30 vaccine and not a 6:30, test. This is the problem, in ASEAN, that mutual confidence.
Yeah, we're in, I would say, FUCA era: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We need to start with an approach of opening up, and trust could only be earned once you are opening up. You're not isolating yourself. You're not thinking that it is you yourself could fix it. It has to be a joint effort. And I always believe in silaturahim, basically the network of what we believe here in Indonesia as gotong royong. Basically, we help each other. So the best, and not because I come from a private sector, but the business side would really be in a much better position to take a lead here. Because during vaccine drives, now government relies on the private sectors, in particular the micro, small, medium enterprises, to participate because they move fast, they don't have bureaucracy, they're very goal oriented, and they need this vaccines in order to reopen the economy. And we now, I guess, all the vaccine centers across the countries have pentahelix, basically public-private educational institutions, communities, and media taking part. So your question is, how do we build trust? I think we need to go and take a baby step. Your institutions would be a great showcase if you could take one or two bubbles, one of two corridors, and have the business community basically take the hand alongside the government to basically start having this same standard, because it has to be all gold standards, because I don't think we will be able to take any deviations or tolerance, because this COVID virus is not discriminating. They'll hit the wealthy, they'll hit the poor. So we just have to be very strict and disciplined in terms of implementing within the travel bubbles. And I would say we do small baby steps, like you mentioned. We start with Phuket, which has a sandbox approach, which we are developing as we speak. And it's similar model with the sandbox. With our president said, it's a gas pedal and a brake, as well as a clutch that we will have to apply. And this apply to health and safety protocols, tracing, tracking, applications, health declarations, including vaccine proof, and also the implementations of digital vaccine passport, or something like digital visa, because everything will be touchless going forward. And I'm very keen. I think this is really something that we could work together and create a project. And from my almost 5 years in the public sector in government, I still believe that the government have the institutional discipline, but the innovations, a lot comes from business. So because my DNA is entrepreneur, I would like to welcome the ASEAN Business Club and CHARI, which has been focusing on the ASEAN framework, to come up with a couple of initiatives, and we're very, very eager and ready to back you up.
That's so wonderful to hear, and we will certainly follow up, Excellency. I like at this stage, to bring in our two panel participants and speakers, into the discussion, although they'll make their statements later. And I would like to start with Riyad Asmat, CEO of AirAsia Malaysia. What do you think? How do you respond to what His Excellency Sandiaga Uno has said so far?
Thank you, Tan Sri. Again, Your Excellency, honored panel members, obviously, ladies and gentlemen.
Congratulations, Riyad, for the acquisitions of Gojek asset in Thailand.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the group's doing a bit. We are pivoting from airline a bit. manage our current situation also. A lot of time on our hands also, Your Excellency. I think first and foremost, what's happening is the fact that we see countries, no matter where we are at the moment, beginning to realize the need to consolidate resources and actually focus on certain areas. I really believe in baby steps as well. What this 1.5 years have taught me as an airline, as the fact that it's the pandemic itself is so dynamic. It changes every minute, it changes every week. You know, we got multiple types of variants now, and you know, it's always a catch up. But one thing as an airline, what we've disciplined ourselves to do, for example, is to make ourselves agile enough to adjust to the things. And that's why I think maybe from a corporate side, you know, there's less bureaucracy, less, you know, areas that we need to look at and whatnot. We are able to become faster to adjust. But going to Your Excellency's point is very heartening. Number one, having the ability to then fly to a place safely, I think is part and parcel of what we are trying to establish or doing at the moment. So when Indonesia opens up, an airline's role is to make sure that the passengers that travel there are safe in that sense. So it's very welcoming to hear countries opening up. But at the same time, you know, I think the consistency still needs to be applied. What we face are changes, too many variants of protocols. Each country has its own ways of managing COVID in one way or another. But for a business perspective, then that becomes a bit difficult. And I'm only saying this from my personal experience because, you know, I fly to Vietnam right now still for humanitarian efforts, different protocol. I fly to China, totally different protocol. Into Malaysia, different protocol. But if we could find consistency across the region in terms of the protocols in these bubbles, then I think it'll be much more pleasant and much more easier, and more importantly, progress towards creating tourism, rebirth of tourism again.
Thank you, Riyad. I mean, I think that point about consistency, and actually, I think also constancy. You know, with ASEAN, they start something, and then they go home. They're distracted, you know, by other things, and they, you know, don't focus and don't follow through. You know, and then it's like you know, sort of you chipping along here, there, everywhere, but there's no final product, you know, that comes. I think with someone like Excellency Santiago Uno, I think you know, if they have that commitment to give life to ASEAN tourism, you know, just focus to give life. I think that there's some hope. Thank you for your comment. Constancy, you know, be there, be in the game, and not just, you know, be distracted the moment you finish your meetings, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah, thank you. But Bill is of course founder and chairman of Minor International Public Company Limited, and as the minister has said, the minister knows him and talked to him. And Bill, we've had Bill before on one of our webinars, and he's very disappointed. At the moment, he's in Phuket, actually, sort of in the sandbox, so to speak. And I wonder, Bill, can you share your experience and then compare it with Indonesia's plans and experiences? Is it possible, Bill?
Yes, I'm coming to you from the Phuket Sandbox. I was one of the first to come in here in the month of July when they opened up. It's a fantastic experiment, which so far is progressing very well. You know, they have, because they are an island, they're able to isolate themselves. They don't allow local people from Bangkok or anywhere else in the country to come in unless they're vaccinated and also have a valid PCR test within 72 hours. But what it's doing is it's opening it up for the first time in now more than a year, tourism for Phuket from around the globe, and also the opportunity for ASEAN to come in. What's really important, I think, is that it's presented also an opportunity for the first time for business people to be able to get together face to face again in a sort of neutral environment. We've had visitors that have come in from Europe and from Asia who can fly in, hold a business meeting with their Thai counterpart here in Phuket, and then leave again to return to their own countries. One of the difficulties that we're having, of course, is that with Thailand going through a new wave, unfortunately, Phuket is still put in the same box as Thailand, even though we have vaccinated 75% of the island. We keep very tight controls. And obviously, we're trying to lobby that Phuket should be looked at differently than Thailand when people return from the sandbox. They shouldn't necessarily be put back into another quarantine when they're vaccinated. They've been tested 3 times while they're on the island of Phuket in the 14 days that they're here. So that's certainly one of the things in getting more global acceptance of various things. And I encourage all of the ASEAN countries to look at the sandbox model, which is being used here successfully, and try to look at that. Bubbles are very difficult, as we've seen between Hong Kong and Singapore. They still have no bubble. But
okay, thank you, thank you, Bill. I'll come back to you on that because the minister has to leave, right around about now. So I would like to give Pak Sandi, Excellency, thank you again. But can we have some parting words from you, Pak Sandi? Please?
Well, thank you very much, and sorry, Bill, but I'm very happy, and we're watching the situations very closely. What happened in Phuket? Obviously, we want to do something similar for Bali, but Bali is a lot larger. Bali have 4 million plus people, and we are still around 30% vaccinated, but we're moving closer there, and the examples of Phuket really part of the collaborations, and I'm in the process of sharing the data with my counterpart in Thailand and trying to set up similar situations bubble in Bali. Bintan is ready to go, but Bintan is waiting for Singapore's lockdown and whenever they're ready, because Bintan have been green zone now for more than 7 months. So yeah, I think it's tough time, but tough time calls for extraordinary collaborations and measures. I have full of confidence for ASEAN leaders, in particular the younger leaders, to take a step forward and start with more innovations, a lot of adaptations, with corporate leaders like Bill and Pak Riyad would show that actually there will be steps that will be taken, but there will be adjustments like pivoting. And it's okay to take risk. I'm pushing my colleagues in various sectors within the government to start trying to live with the virus with us. The latest Delta variants gave us a scare last 2 weeks as bed occupancy rate rose to unprecedented 90% level. But today, judging from the latest number we have, bed occupancy rate is below 70%, and the daily new cases has been pushed down. We just need to make sure that we make preparations in order to improve the health protocols, and I guess getting ready for the virus become a part of our everyday facets of life. So I again thank you, Tan Sri Munir. I would like to visit to your office like before, and just for your information, during my last visit, I mentioned one startup in the health sector that was, the founder was so excited, and he said that, well, you mentioned in the ASEAN Business Club, and today they are unicorns. They within a year and a half, because of they're in the health tech. They're a health technology company. They provide telemedicines. They provide vaccines now. They provide medicines as well as vitamins. And people heard it first at your event, and now they are getting. I guess these are the type of what we would classify as pandemic winners. So let's bring more pandemic winners as we digitize, as we transform our economy as well as cooperations. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, healthcare is the thing, isn't it? And actually, we're working on a platform, a takaful platform for regional healthcare, cheap insurance, takaful insurance, perhaps involving Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei to start with, and then we'll come back to you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, and
we'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Pariat, and see you.
Thank you, SSC.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay, that was a strong get a strong sense of commitment. It's up to us to follow up now. To look to Indonesian leadership to revive the tourism industry, concentrating on ASEAN, perhaps starting off with sort of bubbles involving various tourist destinations in ASEAN. These travel bubbles, Riyadh, there are models, that exist, and I think your group has mentioned, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's the IATA model, for example. So what can be used for ASEAN? I mean, can you give some parameters of what you think should be in the travel bubble? Is IATA bubble good for ASEAN? Or what are the problems? Why has ASEAN, not just say, okay, we'll adopt this and establish standards that we want in our region? And then secondly, can these bubbles only exist as corridors, between countries in specific destinations and or specific destinations and not region-wide? So can you just give models that exist that you think could be applicable to ASEAN, Riyadh?
I think, Tan Sri, the travel bubbles are in existence right now. There are multiple types of bubbles, being birthed over the 1.5 years that I've been running this experience or whatnot. We've got the Singapore bubble. We've got a bilateral reciprocal green lane, fast lane bubble, and then you have the leisure travel bubbles like in Phuket, there's a Sandbox. Then you have the specific business travel bubble. For example, in Malaysia, MIDA has a program where business compatriots can come into Malaysia without being quarantined, but in a very structured manner. They go to the meeting and they go home. We've had experience with that with one of our obvious vendors from France, for example. It's a pleasant experience for people, so on and so forth. Then obviously the one that we've been talking about since last year was the ASEAN travel corridor, something that we hope that could be pushed and could be something even bigger than all the small country-to-country arrangements. It's great, Tan Sri, no doubt. Don't get me wrong on the fact that, I don't mind having Malaysia talking to Singapore and whatnot, but to have a standardization in the ASEAN of 600 million people, I think will make things much, much easier, much more acceptable. The challenges I think we face right now is the level of uncertainty. As an organization, every day we adjust. We look at what policies come out, not just for Malaysia, but for the region as well. But the minute a new policy comes out, we have to adjust our operations accordingly so that we are not against any regulation and we are abiding by all the necessary requirements. So I feel that travel bubbles can exist, multiple types, not an issue. But I think I go back to the point of consistency to understand. And more importantly, these travel bubbles cannot be fixated with certain protocols, which we are also seeing. Certain countries apply a certain set of protocols, but when something happens, they just shut down. Instead of adjusting or maneuvering or making it more flexible to a degree. Fully understand we've been hit by multiple waves of COVID. It's not something that we want to see. But then again, the realization that we need to adjust and adjust quickly needs to be shared, not just from a corporate perspective, but from a government authority perspective. So that's where I feel that, in what we can and cannot do right now. There are some level of constraints from a corporate side of things because the policies and policymakers also have their views on certain things. But if, for example, ASEAN comes out with a standardization that is agreeable across, even to the point of quarantine, potentially, if, for example, you're fully vaccinated, tested, this is the standard protocols that we have to do before you fly or you get into an aircraft. You are tested 72 hours for PCR test, not even antigen. You're fully vaccinated, double dosed. After 2 weeks, travel. Allow that person to have more flexibility when he arrives into a destination. The minute he arrives, you can still do a test, not an issue. You know, we've seen that happen, not just in Phuket, but in America. They allow people to fly in fully vaccinated, recognized by who. Again, they look at standardizations that are available globally versus nationally or internet or countrywide. So things like that, I think, will make things easier for us to manage. And more importantly, if we want to recover from this setback, these are the things that we have to make hard calls on, because there's definitely going to be risk. There's no foolproof to a situation, but then that's where, you know, I think His Excellency just now mentioned, you know, you have the gas pedal, you have the brake, and more importantly, you also have a clutch to balance things off as well. So it's not just an automatic way of doing things, but, you know, we just need to continuously innovate, adjust in that sense.
I would have thought, if I was an immigration officer, a health official, you know, at the border, the border, we have a multiplicity of bubbles and qualifications. That will give me a big headache, you know, right?
Yes.
There'll be lots of queuing and lots of waiting and lots of disagreement about. That's one side of it, you know. The other side of it is, I mean, you take, for example, like I'm double vaccinated in Malaysia, right?
Yes.
I'm double vaccinated. I'm Pfizer, you know, double vaccinated. I have the app, you know, to show the certificate in my Sejahtera app to show that I'm double vaccinated. Will my Sejahtera certificate in the Sejahtera app be accepted? Be accepted. Okay, there's a problem, you know. There's an international acceptance of just the vaccine, and then there's also the test. You know, some countries require the test. And you do the PCR test, you know, a few days before you arrive anywhere. Now, is that PCR test you've done in a private hospital or whatever hospital accepted by another country? Now, if it's, I noticed like Singapore, for example, they announced, you know, they hope by September they will live with the virus, right? And as they plan, you know, that it is endemic, they'll live. But their announcements of opening up, I noticed every country that they identified as they will openly, fully open up with, not one of them is an ASEAN country. You know, not one of them is an ASEAN country. So what are the standards that Singapore is looking at that ASEAN countries do not have?
Tan Sri, they're looking exactly at the standard that we're looking at. So that's where I think the continued discussion is required, the understanding of what actually we are utilizing in terms of technology. AirAsia, for example, we've decided to build our own app. We have a super app. We are going to have our own digital passport on that, which will allow all our passengers to upload their certificates and allow them to also upload their testing results, for example. How we are going to authenticate it is by working with other parties in the region. For example, in Indonesia, we are working with EHAC. EHAC will be able to verify whether the uploaded information by the Indonesian citizen is valid and authentic. And hence, if it is valid and authentic, he can then purchase a plane ticket and he can fly. He will be given that go ahead. So I think what will happen between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, for example, we are all looking at the same thing because we are cross-utilizing technology now that will allow people to be verified. I think that's one of the first steps. Second step, obviously, that's when immigration comes into place. Again, then it's government to government. What kind of platform that needs to be?
Yeah, that's good. We spent quite a bit of time on the enabling healthcare health factors to make people travel. Now, once you arrive somewhere, I would like to bring William Heineke and talk to him at some length, because there is a question, Bill, that I believe you can answer. I'm going to put two questions to you, okay? You were describing what's happening in Thailand, describing about the Phuket Sandbox. So what are the other opening up measures that you would suggest? And secondly, there is a question from the audience, actually. They say a lot of workers in the tourism industry, into the tourism sector, have been out of work for a year or more. And so many some might have to be retrained. It's like just after the war, things have been sort of flattened out. And how do you rebuild? And offer the products that people want, the standards of enjoyment, tourism products that people want. Bill, the floor is yours.
All right. I think, one thing in trying to address the issues that face us here in ASEAN, we've all seen that as Singapore has said, that we're going to have to live with this endemic. And I think one of the things that we've got to become cognizant with is how we communicate that. To me, right now, people communicate the number of cases and the number of deaths. Actually, what I think is the most critical aspect to be communicated in each given country is the number of hospitalizations and the number of deaths. Because now we know from the UK, which is almost fully vaccinated, and many other countries that are fully vaccinated, that the number of cases can still be there. It's like now having the common flu, but they don't require hospitalization, and they don't require putting pressure on the hospital care. So to me, this is one of the very first things that we have to try and adapt so that we really truly know the situation. The fact that you have 50,000 cases, if no one is hospitalized and no one dies, it's immaterial. So certainly that to me is one thing very critical that we've got to adjust to.
That's a brilliant point. I think most countries are feeling that even in their own domestic jurisdiction. When cases, how serious, how delirious, how many, of course, then they come up with deaths, right? Then they come up with recoveries, recovery rate. But you're saying, we want to know hospitalization, serious cases, and deaths, and recovery as well. But recovery should be so that's a good point. That's also being talked about in Malaysia a lot. As the cases go up per capita, worst in the world, 1 million cases and so on. Those things frighten people. I think that communication is a great point, Bill. But coming to the second point, Bill, what about, is the tourism product good enough to be enjoyed again, after having been decimated?
I think it is. We're seeing here in Phuket, although we're still running with very low occupancies, probably for the whole island, maybe less than 20%. But already the people are returning to work. Training has always been ongoing, certainly in many of the bigger hotel organizations, and we're ready to go. People are dying to provide great service. I don't think the products have gone away. Most of us, taking the opportunity while we've been closed to try to improve our product wherever we can, and have it ready for the reopening that we think is occurring now. So I'm less worried about that. My greater worry is how do we get people vaccinated quickly? To me, it's very important that we can see in Thailand that people don't want handouts, unemployment, and other things. They want vaccines. They want to see the country safe so they can go back to work. They don't want to see lockdowns. And lockdowns, we need more vaccines, not more lockdowns in these countries in ASEAN.
Yeah, but that opens up a very difficult issue about the distribution of vaccines in the world.
Absolutely.
It's not that the governments in ASEAN don't want to vaccinate their people, but they can't get the supplies. And of course, the suppliers, Thailand is a producer of AZ, AstraZeneca vaccines. There is a supply choke that, from Thailand itself, but most of all, they look at supplies from America and Europe. Is there, the minister just now mentioned, I have been talking to some Japanese business people, why can't ASEAN, like ASEAN talked about producing an ASEAN motor car and all this stuff, right? Why can't there be a huge ASEAN project to have vaccines produced in ASEAN? Because people are talking about booster vaccines. You need a booster. We're just talking about getting the 2 vaccines now. So can't businessmen, get together and have somewhere in ASEAN a vaccine production center or 2 vaccine production centers?
I think that's a great idea, but the problem is, as you probably are aware, that it's going to take quite some time to get these facilities built and tested and developed. The AstraZeneca one is a good point in context here in Thailand. It's already been in operation for nearly a year and a half, and it still isn't functioning properly. It's still a choke. So to develop more at this time, I think by the time they're active, the crisis, much of the crisis may be behind us. There's tremendous capacity being built and around the world. And I think we're going to see a surplus coming soon. Unfortunately, right now, ASEAN is struggling to get that surplus so that we can hurry up and vaccinate all of our people.
What can you do actually? Okay, assuming you say there is, I think about how many billion people have been vaccinated out of total world population of about 7 to 8 billion, right? 7.5 billion or so. I mean, the numbers say that about close to 2 billion have been vaccinated, and most of them, of course, are in Europe and America, and of course China, which adds a lot of billions, to the 2 billion, right? Okay, well, but the problem is ASEAN is not getting vaccines fast enough. How could ASEAN businesses get together to help ASEAN governments acquire vaccines on a bulk basis? Would ASEAN businesses be able to do it? Would the tourism sector help? Because tourism sector obviously will benefit, as you were just saying, if more people got the vaccines. What can you do?
Well, I think the private sector, certainly in Thailand, has been volunteering to buy its own vaccines, try and take the pressure off the governments. They're paying for their own vaccines. Our view is that we should allow and encourage everyone to get vaccinated as quickly and as fast as possible, no matter what they do. If they have to go abroad to do it, fair enough. That's not practical for our large populations. But the key thing is the governments can open up. Many of these vaccines are for profit. So at least by opening up some of the channels, at least those people that can afford it and those companies that can afford it can then take advantage of sourcing vaccines on their own and seeing that they're applied whether to their own staff or to the general public. But the whole thing which we have to recognize is the key to recovery is vaccinations. And it has to be, all efforts have to be put on how we make that happen faster than currently.
Okay, I think the Philippines, led by one of ASEAN-backed, the ASEAN-backed chair in the Philippines, Joey Concepcion Jr., has been at the forefront in getting the Philippines private sector to acquire the vaccines for their staff, but they've given away a quarter of their total numbers of vaccines to the government to sort of vaccinate the general. But the level of vaccination in the Philippines is one of the lowest in ASEAN, and so this is only a drop in the ocean. But so what I was talking about is it conceivable, is it possible to have bulk buying by ASEAN as a whole?
I'm sure there's got to be an opportunity there. And as you say, we will be requiring boosters. So this is going to be a business that continues on. And certainly ASEAN should look at it, and rather than competing against each other, should perhaps try to have an ASEAN plan for the vaccinations and for boosters as we go forward. I think one of the other things we've been urging nations that have excess vaccines, such as America, to use their vaccines to vaccinate the Americans abroad, to take pressure off individual governments. The same thing, China has already started vaccinating its citizens abroad, taking pressure again off even in ASEAN countries. We have UK and France, but so far they're also moving very quickly to vaccinate their citizens abroad. So this is a global challenge that we have. and everyone has to contribute, especially those nations that have excess capacity. We've seen the American government has already donated a large number of doses to Thailand, but unfortunately they haven't vaccinated Americans that are in Thailand. So this relies now on the Thai government to take that up.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I noticed, Bill, in its recent announcement, the Singapore Parliament is meeting right now, and lots of questions have been thrown at the Singapore ministers who have very efficiently answered those questions. But one other thing, apart from vaccination and having this herd immunity and so on, the other side is also having tests and trace capability. And insofar as tests are concerned, of course, the actual product for tests has to be enhanced. Singapore, for example, is talking about something like a breathalyzer test. I've seen some people working on saliva tests. A breathalyzer test is even better and quicker. So shouldn't the region be thinking ahead? Because this is going to be, like, I hate the term, but to be the changes, the new normal, so-called.
Absolutely. But when they require more testing for children, trust me, the saliva test, the breath test will be far more acceptable than a PCR test that probes the brain.
But then cross-sectorally, because tourism is the one most in need of free flow of people. Cross-sectorally, I mean, I know you're doing all sorts of businesses in the hospitality sector, but shouldn't you also be starting to think about doing something in terms of vaccination production? Perhaps that's too big. Perhaps in terms of testing production or products, shouldn't hoteliers and so on get together and say, look, this is what we need. Shall we work together? Because everyone seems to be working very separately and then complaining about not getting what they want. Come to
that's
get
happening
what they
with
want by working
as well
together.
As the private sector. That happens with the government as well.
Yeah, why don't you take the lead, bring the government in as well, that kind of thing. I think there has to be a greater, rush to do things. I think we perhaps, but I mean, I noticed from your profile, and we've talked before, you've done so much in the Thai tourism industry, the hospitality sector. Perhaps now that we're facing this very serious problem that chokes that sector, the sector must try and unchoke it as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I fully agree with you. And certainly there's a number of initiatives on buying certain testing equipment that can be used in a place like the Sandbox, which still hasn't got a breath analyzer or a saliva test. So we're trying very hard to get some of that equipment into Phuket to be state-of-the-art and be able to be used for more rapid testing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Can I invite some maybe 1 minute each final comments from Riyadh and then from you before I invite the Deputy Secretary General Satvinder to make his closing keynote address. Anything you would like to say that you've not said, Bill?
I think we're all on this boat together, and I think it's absolutely critical that we work more closely. That means government and private sector has to work more closely, and the various governments within ASEAN and the various private sectors within ASEAN. We're all having to get out of it. I think your point that you raised was excellent, the one about trying to encourage more ASEAN tourism, because long distance and long haul travel is going to take some time. And the one question which I think everyone should be looking for is that one of the biggest economies in this part of the world affecting ASEAN is China. And so far, we've seen no movement on China when they're going to open up or when they're going to allow tourists to go abroad. So they're tourists. And that's a major factor in our planning and how we will cope with a reopening. But they remain extremely quiet at this time.
Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. And Riyadh, a final thought, perhaps?
Again, I think that for us is ASEAN, the potential is there to recover right now. Like Bill has mentioned, long haul is a way before anything else. I think it's short haul. We have really nice places to go around here. There's pent-up demand. We just need to work together at the end of the day, both corporate, government, with the new technologies, applied as well as innovations and so forth. I think that's the only way we can get out of this.
Thank you so much. Now it is my privilege and pleasure to invite His Excellency, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, His Excellency Satvinder Singh, to deliver the closing keynote address. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Thank you for this invitation. First of all, I want to congratulate you for keeping us all highly engaged, both the panelists and all the audience. I must say, it's refreshing. I like your style. I like the way you managed the event. A big congratulations to you, the way you handled the conversation. All of us are deeply thankful for taking us through it. It's absolutely not painful, and you've done such a good job. First of all, of course, also like to thank Kerry for putting this together, working with yourselves. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge all the dear panelists, Honorable Yanti Rahman, Will, and of course, Fakriyat, and of course, His Excellency the Minister who left. But again, all of you were excellent in your presentations and sharings, and really, you didn't hold back what you felt about important issues that truly matter to the industry, to the sector. And I think we all kind of know that it's even more important than ever for the ASEAN tourism sector to come together in cooperation and come together to think about innovative ways to deal with the new reality. And I mean, I don't have to tell all of you how important tourism is to the industry and sector. It's a huge contributor to our GDPs for each of the countries in ASEAN. And if we don't get the sector back on its feet, there's going to be a big chunk of our economy falling sick and not recovered. You know? To be fair, not all sectors are doing badly right now. I think many sectors have picked up. Some sectors are actually doing even better than expected. But I think tourism is definitely one sector where we really need to all come together in a much more deeper, concerted way to help us all find solutions out of the current challenges. And I would also say that, as highlighted by many of the speakers in the forum, the tourism industry, I think what I'm glad to hear and see is that, you know, we are all firmly in the right direction, preparing for recovery. And in my mind, moving forward, I think it's important, you know, there is a plan that we all have put together. In particular, the ASEAN tourism sector, we are finalizing our post-COVID-19 recovery plan for ASEAN tourism. And to me, the framework is there and there's a will towards coming out with something effective, but still, in my mind, I think more needs to be done. I think number one, first of all, I do agree with all of you that it's important to get the support of businesses to reopen safely. I think here I meant really both the public sector and the private sector needs to really push stronger for vaccination coverage. Now, this cannot be propagated only by the governments. We all had a discussion just now. I think the private sector definitely needs to step up in the propagation and strengthen the drive for vaccinations for our respective communities. I also don't think that the government sector are the best what I call deal makers when it comes to securing the best sources of vaccine in the world today. Look, the vaccines are produced by private companies, and who are better placed than to negotiate deal making? The private sector, of course. So I kind of propagate what Tan Sri is saying. You know, I think there's a lot of role, there's a bigger role for private sector to step up and be a lot more innovative. And what I'm glad to see is that in many of the geographies, the governments are welcoming the additional participation of private sector to step up. So they are providing their flexibility to want to work with the private sector to be able to procure effectively globally. And what I'm also happy to see is that in the region, the governments are truly indeed looking to curb this spread, and they are doing their best in trying to strengthen the procurement themselves at the national levels. At the same time, they're also pushing very hard for local production. I mean, the amount of effort being put into it is unprecedented, and you can see that. But I think I'm also, you know, I was quite happy to hear even Minister, you know, mentioning about how there is even a will to be able to reach higher level of vaccination, up to even 70% for Indonesia before end of the year. And as all of you also mentioned, there is efforts being made by some of the regional governments, like the good news announced by Singapore, that vaccinated permanent residents now may travel without a 14-day stay at home. That hopefully is really the kind of the drivers that we need in order to create more of the regional tourism, hopefully in the next couple of months. And I believe more of the governments in the region are going to join in the opening up as they start reaching a much more higher level of vaccination within their populations, as been mentioned by Honorable Yanti just now in the speech. Secondly, I also believe that the ASEAN Secretariat is working quite hard with all the stakeholders to enable the safe restoration of the international and the intra-ASEAN travel. And the ASEAN Digital Health Passport is being worked on. And by the ASEAN Travel Corridor Arrangement Task Force, which all of you know is led by Indonesia. And I'm glad to know that, I've actually been reading some of the follow-ups. The thinking is of not reinventing. The thinking is to harmonize, and not just harmonize between us, but harmonize some of the protocols to global IATA protocols, so that at least when it comes to travel for global visitors and for us traveling, not just within the region, but all over the world, there'll be some form of comfort and some form of harmonization. And definitely the ASEAN Digital Health Passport hopefully will bring the assurance of proper documentation of testing and vaccination, and also will allow some proper global health protocols, kind of building the kind of confidence we all need for the region. Now, thirdly, I believe that to promote the principles of sustainability and inclusiveness in a recovery, we need to recognize and address the affected sectors that are linked to travel and other contact intensive sectors. I think this is where I think we must not forget that the SME, the women-owned businesses, the low income, especially the informal workers. In fact, I just saw a study by JICA, they commissioned BCG, and which actually clearly showed, again, the most affected by the entire COVID is actually the most vulnerable. They are the hardest hit by the COVID-19. The low income segment, particularly that's associated to the working poor. This is where the greatest amount of job losses and reduction of income has happened. And each of the governments, I believe, the civil societies, the private sector, I think we need to make sure we manage the informal sectors and help them stand on their feet again. I think this is a responsibility of all of us to ensure that this entire gap is not taken care of. Sometimes we create those grants, but honestly, those grants don't take care of the informal sector. I think this is where a concerted effort is to be made to ensure there's some inclusivity and some care is given to the most vulnerable. Fourthly, I think we, of course, need to reinvent the tourism industry to be a little bit more adaptable and innovative. I mean, this is where, of course, the digital technology part, the upgrading of the labor skills is an important thing. I think the good thing that we all can celebrate is we are seeing, at least definitely the reality is on the ground in this region. There's some real sustainable change in the use of digital across all segments. I mean, even at the consumer level, you can see a lot of us are turning to digital platforms during the pandemic, assessing social media, e-commerce, online education for the first time. And I'm also glad that the informal business in tourism, they are also kind of leveraging this trend forward, ensuring that they remain connected to business continuity in this period. Now, I think we need to keep this momentum up. We need to push harder and get all of the tourism services businesses and the individuals who are in our industry to be furthermore familiarized with digitalization, so that this is the skill that's going to help us not through just out of the COVID, but it's really the way forward for the success of our sector. Finally, of course, I think for the preparedness for this long-term resilience, I also feel that our industry needs to be dealing with this new norm of this endemic COVID. I think the part that's most important is really health, cleanliness, and safety. I think that's going to be like the biggest key ingredient for transformation for the industry. And we need to tackle this very well. And the MICE industry, the hotels, they all need to make sure that there's seriousness in being able for us to tackle this and bring health, cleanliness, and safety to the core of our capability and relevance, so that we can assure customers and consumers that we have their safety in mind and they have confidence of, again, coming to enjoy hospitality and attend events and meetings, and that whole tourism begins again with full confidence. To me, the recovery is not going to be as linear. As you know, the situation, as we've seen the last 1.5 years, is always fluid and can be unpredictable. As such, I think the only way we are going to overcome this is truly through collaborative efforts. And this is where the efforts of both the public and private coming together. I think even this conversation that we had this morning, these are the important things that cannot be underestimated, how important this kind of conversations are. It energizes both multilaterals like us, the Secretariat, the governments. I'm sure the Minister enjoyed the engagement today with the private sector. And of course, you yourselves, we need to tackle the issues, the complexities together. And what I can say is that, of course, resiliency is achieved through perseverance, through amidst of all the adversities. And history has taught us again, over and over again, that definitely the world can overcome crises if we all come together. I think with that, I would like to, once again, thank everybody for a wonderful engagement session. And I can assure you that the Secretariat is deeply concerned about the well-being of the tourism sector, and we are doing our best to prioritize resources into coming up with priorities. And this is again, thanks to also Brunei for leading some of these initiatives under their chairmanship this year. So thank you again, everyone, for your efforts.
Thank you so much, Excellency Satvinder Singh. I think the closing comments that Excellency made are not, I can assure the audience, the usual, sometimes you hear these comments about, we are open, we want to engage and we'll do it together. I can assure you that from our experience with Excellency Satvinder Singh, it actually happens. We do try and work together, and we are engaged. The point is, like Riyadh said, there must be constancy and execution, as we used to say, and I used to say in investment banking, nothing means anything unless there's execution. Otherwise, it's so much on the table. Thank you for your, you started by emphasizing the need to get together. You ended with the need for collaborative efforts, and in between, in your closing keynote address, you identified a number of structural issues that need to be addressed, even as we try to revive the tourism industry, underlining, I think, in particular, underlining the informal sector, those who have been left behind, who might fall between the cracks if we do not bear in mind their needs as well as we revive and look forward to the new world, the AC after COVID, but there will be COVID, but we have to revive our industries. Thank you very much again, Excellency. Now, may I thank everyone who has been present, and in particular, of course, the Minister for his excellent presentation and willingness for follow-up to pursue certain targets, to Riyadh for identifying and emphasizing the need for constancy, and otherwise nothing will move. And then Mr. Bill Heineke for underlining the need to be creative and so as to revive the tourism industry, and Yanti also for underlying the fact that certain things must be done at the ASEAN level, which I also underlined subsequently. And so everyone has made his contribution, and thank you very much. And we will, with Chari, together with ASEAN Back, follow up with what has been discussed. Otherwise, there's no point. We're just talking and talking and talking. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, everyone. And take care, stay safe, and all the very best. May I pass over back to Joki.
Thank you. Thanks, Tan Sri and our speakers. And it has been a rich discussion. And indeed, there are things for us to follow up as Tan Sri has concluded. And we just really hope that ASEAN will develop common testing protocols, health standards, and the private sector will come forward to support the public sector to promote intra-ASEAN tourism. And as ASEAN ramps up the vaccination efforts, more sandboxes will be evaluated and tested. And we also hope that the development of the ASEAN Travel Corridor Arrangement Framework, which we know that is underway, will be concluded as soon as possible to facilitate essential business travels among ASEAN. And thank you so much for joining us, for our speakers and all the participants online. For the members of the media, we will send out a press release later today. Thanks again. Please support our future work and follow us on social media. Till we meet again, stay safe and take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Stay safe.